2024 was an exciting year for Destiny 2 speedrunning. From cool new tech being discovered to some crazy times being set, this year was packed with exciting activity from January to December. For this rewind, I've gone for a different approach from last year. We're going to be moving through the year chronologically so we can remember runs in the context of patches, in-game events, and metas. Most of us have probably forgotten a lot of what's changed this year in this game we all love, so this will be a nice opportunity to sit back and reminisce on everything that happened to the speedrunning community in 2024. Without further ado, let's begin on the very first day of January in the Dreaming City when two Lost Sector speedrunning goats, Levy and Scaryton, both submitted 26-second Aphelions rest runs, marking the first time since Season of the Seraph that this sector has seen a sub-30 time. During the rest of Season 23, the sector would go on to see a total of 4 sub-30 runs, the most it's ever seen in a single season, really showcasing how powerful the Queen's Foil sensor artifact was for sectors at the time. With mods like Flint Striker, Revitalizing Blast, Solo Operative, Overload Rocket Launcher, and Argent Ordnance, it was a Rain of Fire Gjallarhorn dream come true in the last season before the final shape. 2 days later, after much community demand, the Speedrun.com team added skip categories to the Destiny 2 MISC site. Featuring popular segments like GOS 1.4 and DSC entrance, these categories quickly blew up, garnering over 200 submissions before the year's end. While I would love to showcase some of my favorites, there are simply too many impressive runs in these categories to fit them into this video. Look out for a compilation in the future though. I was personally invested in this next run because Lightly Fried Fish Fillets, yep, that's the runner's name, has been working on it for over a year. After a long grind, it's always nice to see the fruits of your labor, and on January 6th, Mr. Fish Fillets achieved a sub-9 solo The Arrival, the first Witch Queen campaign mission. One of the longest solo missions there is, given that the world record now sits at an 8:58. Next up we have our first raid. On January 8th, 2024, Seiyun and her team completed Last Wish in a staggering 12 minutes and 22 seconds. Frequently cited as one of the best raid runs of the pre-Final Shape era, the run features excellent segments all throughout and is a testament to the hard work and long hours of practice that the team put in the months prior. While Destiny's oldest available raid hasn't really had any speedrun activity since this submission, thanks to -5 and a few other changes, recent developments have attracted a few teams to revisit this category. Look forward to a new record in 2025. Halfway into January now. Ever since Root of Nightmares was first cleared solo, players realized that it might be fun to try the ultimate solo speedrun, a full raid. With players like Zemo bringing the time down to under half an hour using damage bugs like the Horseman swap glitch at the time, this was one of the coolest solo speedrun eras in recent memory. Though many of these runs were obviously not acceptable on speedrun.com due to these game-breaking damage glitches, I've included Boop's 3936 from the 13th of January on this list in order to commemorate this first, and so far, only era of solo raid speedrunning. Speaking of Root of Nightmares, it was around this time that players had discovered yet another way to bully Nezarec on Titan. Peregrine Greaves had recently been buffed to refund your full melee costs when hitting enemies like champions and tormentors. Since Nezarec is a tormentor, this allowed for an easy and quick trio 1 phase, which was quickly exploited by Tall Sandy's team in order to secure a 13-11 trio run time. Unfortunately, the team decided to stop running when the interaction between the Titan exotic and boss tormentors like Nezarec was nerfed 4 days later, but the time they set was still very solid and worth the mention on this list. While January was a fairly busy month for speedrunning, February was comparatively much quieter. On the 15th, Zemo submitted a 9:45 solo Warlord's Ruin, the result of a back and forth setting of times between him and fellow solo runner and challenge player Dabs. In my opinion, this era was the peak of Banner of War runs and really showcased just how powerful Berserker Titan and Grapple Melees were during Season 23. March would mark the last month before Into the Light, so it makes sense that runner activity wasn't particularly high around this time either. After another brief episode in the sunlight, quick swapping was patched for the 3rd time on the 5th, at the same time Guardian Games 2024 was released. Compared to the first time it was patched, this time it had almost no impact on the community, since high burst damage options have drastically improved since the days of Anarchy Double Slug, and this version was also much more annoying to pull off than the original. The same patch that got rid of quick swapping also brought us something new though, the Skimmer. Runners quickly discovered that this new vehicle was actually faster than a Sparrow when spamming boost and dodge, but that was quickly patched later that month. Today, skimmers aren't really used in speedrunning, but they do offer an easy way to perform time-insensitive horizontal crossings. Back to runs. On March 14th, Crow uploaded one of the most impressive solo dungeon runs in recent Destiny history, completing the trifecta of Pit of Heresy categories that were split after the patching of the Chamber of Suffering ball dupe. With a time of 8:50, Crow managed to beat a record that had not been bested in nearly 3 years, running for punishing RNG and showcasing clean execution. While we waited for the delayed final shape release, April tided us over with Into the Light, which released on the 9th. With it, we got a whole package of the so-called Brave weapons. While the new version of Edge Transit would prove to be a very influential heavy jail and a sign of the heavy meta to come, I have to say that the micro missile rework is probably the most impactful change to D2 speedrunning in quite some time. Not only did it decrease the necessity of warlocks by lowering the barrier of entry to vertical movement access, but runners quickly discovered that you could stack up to 7 mountaintop sticky grenades in order to send yourself extreme distances. Almost immediately, word spread and people started to develop new skip routes and strategies. Since everyone was farming Onslaught to get their hands on Edge Transit and Mountaintop, naturally some trios decided to speedrun the 50-wave Legend version. While it wasn't run in a very official capacity, I'll throw in some footage of Special Heroes Teams 3837 to commemorate both Onslaught speedrunning and the bugged Xenophage ammo drops that created a tether chaining cenotaph meta in this little pocket of speedrunning a unique activity. Into the Light also brought us the return of 2 infamous exotic missions. The first of these was The Whisper, a speedrunner favorite featuring dimly lit stone pathways and expanses. Within days, the fireteam time had been reduced to a few minutes, with a final time of 2:07 being posted by Fishy's team on the 29th. Sadly, this time will likely never be beaten, as the very next day the oob that allowed for such a low time was patched, preventing the bypassing of the Blight ad clear section in the middle of the mission. May marked the last month before the final shape launch. New DLCs usually mean new patches and a new sandbox, so a lot of runners and teams were trying to wrap up their runs before something could compromise their strategies. Starting us off on the 5th, we have Reshi's 558 solo run of the first Lightfall mission, First Contact. One of the few remaining Warlock-focused levels, this run features some of the cleanest Warlock movement in any Destiny speedrun, and is an excellent showcase of what a strong understanding of Destiny's movement micro-optimizations can look like. On the very same day, Alec3556 uploaded a 435 solo run of Birthplace of the Vile. While this run is not as mechanically intensive as Reshi's, I thought the routing was unique for a solo strike, and that some of the strategies like keeping Shatterscape momentum through a teleport during the boss fight were unique enough to highlight here. The second raid record to drop this year was King's Fall, with the first sub 12 submitted by Excluded's team on May 13th. While this 1144 was not the time the team was targeting, the unmentioned desync patch and -5 impacted the raid so drastically that even a subpar time would become much harder to beat after the changes that would occur a month later. For those unfamiliar, Titan Hammer of Soul desync was a glitch that allowed a brand claimer to be used on both daughters at once, and of course with 4 of the healthiest raid bosses in the game in back-to-back encounters, this raid was easily the most impacted by the -5 damage changes. Still, there's hope for a team to beat this run despite desync being patched, with new strategies like Golgoroth skip being discussed by potential runners. Just one day after the King's Fall run dropped, another minute barrier was broken in Prophecy when Crew and his team achieved the first ever sub 5 Prophecy. Featuring a new cube skip into an early transition, this run serves as the magnum opus of a long and storied war Crew has been waging against this dungeon for years. If you want to watch a dungeon run that is clean, coordinated, and chock full of unique strategies, I highly recommend this one. On the very same day, some of you might remember that Mechanier's double stacking was also patched, an exploit that allowed you to quadruple the damage of high damage sidearms like Final Warning. While there were some runners experimenting with this damage strategy for runs like Solo Spire of the Watcher, this patch quickly put an end to that theory crafting. As if May couldn't get any more exciting with new mission, raid, and dungeon records, on the 20th of May, what is widely agreed upon as the best raid record on the site was submitted to speedrun.com. I am of course referring to the first sub 9 Root of Nightmares, achieved after months of grinding by Sick and his team. This 858 features some of the cleanest team-wide raid gameplay I've ever seen in its first 2 encounters, on top of a 2-plate Explicator and a well-behaved Nezarec leading into a clean kill. Today, this run is easily the toughest raid submission to beat, especially given that -5 has created challenges in second encounter at clear, 2-plating Explicator, and of course, Nezarec is less civil than he was back then. Unfortunately, not all raid teams were celebrating around this time. On the 21st, Last Wish runners discovered that the Gunpowder Gamble Taken Armaments interaction that many had been using to spam Gjallarhorn in encounters like Shiroshi and Vault was patched. While this wasn't as debilitating as the desync patch in King's Fall, it certainly made ammo a little more annoying to come by for teams running Wish. When I said May was a busy month for speedrunning, I meant it. We're not even halfway through everything that happened in the month before the final shape. Next up, we have a master difficulty quarry run from Xylent, clocking in at 33 seconds. If there's any sector that showcases how much sector design has shifted in the years leading up to 2024, it has to be this one. There's nothing like eating a nade for heat rises and using strafe glide to blaze a trail of blasted Cabal corpses using Gallahorn, and Xylent does a great job of showcasing the essence of running some of the older sector designs here. Remember when I was talking about Crew's war against Prophecy? Well, that war wasn't just being waged in the fireteam category. Crew's been battling on 3 fronts in this dungeon, and 10 days after dropping the first sub 5 fireteam, he dropped the first sub 7 solo. This guy is relentless. The second place time is a full 3 minutes behind his time, and it's a Crew Prophecy run we're talking about here, so of course the run itself is clean too, just don't look at what happens after Q. Love you, Crew. As we approached the last days of Lightfall, more and more runners began piling in their runs at an even faster rate. Some of these runners are sector runners whose speedrun of choice is literally on a daily rotator, so the amount of time left to run here is even more limited. One of these runners is Stony, who on the last day of Bunker E15 in Season of the Wish submitted the first and only sub-minute run of Expert Bunker we've ever seen. While most sectors are run on Rain of Fire Warlock, this might just be the best Titan sector run I've ever watched, with every movement and rocket planned and executed with precision. It seems like May is the month of superlatives, some of the best mission, raid, dungeon, and sector records, and within the very same day as Stony's bunker run, Spire's Trio DSC team dropped the best Lowman run on the site too. Completing Deepstone Crypt with 3 people in 13:20, watching this run it almost feels like this is how DSC was meant to be played, on some sort of challenge difficulty, with how well these 3 players' roles are balanced. If you want to look at a raid in an entirely new light, even if you've already watched 6-man DSC runs before, this is a great run to watch. Another time-limited activity coming to a close with Lightfall was of course the now beloved Pantheon activity. Featuring a gauntlet of progressively harder and longer raid boss encounters, 5 of the 6 members of the sub-9 root team attempted to speedrun one of the most difficult activities in the game. Hailed by gaming outlets as one of the most challenging activities in Destiny 2, the Pantheon was clearly designed as a one-off combat challenge, and yet here were 6 dedicated players who were not just going to run over the final 7 encounter stretch, but run through it in just 25 minutes and 45 seconds. Watching this run, it's clear why Bungie would go on to triple nerf Golden Gun chaining just a week later, also stopping to patch the whole roll hitting the bounce off the map and instantly dying thing. Regardless, this will definitely be remembered as one of Destiny's most unique speedruns during one of its most unique eras. Down to our last 4 runs in May. The last sector run in Season 23 that I'll mention here is Levy's Concealed Void run, another solid showing of Rain of Fire mastery, and a nice send-off to the OP Season of the Wish artifact. After claiming 2 records in Prophecy, you'd think Crew was due for a break. But as Crew does, on the last 2 days of May, he drops not 1, but 2 Shattered Throne records, including Solo in 424 and Fireteam in 239. Easily the fastest dungeon category in the game by far, it's been fun to see how fully optimized every second of this dungeon has become over the past few years. There's a few teams still running this one from time to time, so I'm excited to see if a new record will drop in 2025. Finally, our last May run features the second exotic mission returned to us during Into the Light. That mission is none other than 0 Hour with its tight metal passageways and friendly host Trevor. While many spent hours every week clambering through this mission to solve puzzles and complete their Outbreaks kit, Reminiscent and his team saw fit to complete the entire mission in 5 minutes and 39 seconds as part of a community-hosted competition, a record that still stands to this day despite the mission being on Bugged Legend difficulty at the time. At last, we are in June. The Final Shape release on the 4th is right around the corner, but before that happens, Kyo and his team decide to run Warden of Nothing down one last time on June 1st for a final time of 3:51. Always cool seeing 3 of the same class leapfrog through a strike in order to get to the next section right as your teammate finishes the one behind you. Our last plus 20 raid or dungeon run also happens to be the last run of the Lightfall era of Destiny speedrunning. An 11:07 solo duality run submitted by Faldo, this run sticks out in my memory because of the cool usage of the Fleshed Storm aspect as a ranged refresh for Wormgod Caress in order to cleanly one Valakidal. While it wasn't the run Faldo was hoping for, as he says in his description, time was up. A common thing you'll hear from Destiny runners who always seem to be running against the live service clock. And now it's time for the biggest change of the year and one of the biggest in Destiny's history. Let's just list off all the things that the Final Shape changed for speedrunners. Enhanced Eager Vortex Swords, full ammo unload-in, an underrated one for runs without a flag at the start, the addition of Still Hunt, Ergo Sum, and Choir of One, though that one came later, Prismatic and everything that came with it, including insane exotic class items, the removal of legendary shards, and now everyone's running out of banners, raid mods being made 0 energy cost, and of course the death knell that was the addition of -5 and surges to raids and dungeons. Some of us might have forgotten surges, but these two changes completely killed motivation to run either activity for many at the time. Beyond that, the final shape brought with it a lot of things. The cementing of rocket sidearms, area denials, and heavy GLs as the kings of ad clear and DPS for example, but the main trend that really took off this year is the replacement of warlocks with hunters in almost every major category of Destiny speedrunning. With enhanced vortexes, the gaps that hunters couldn't close without an extended glide grew shorter. With new mountaintop, the jumps hunters couldn't make without heat rises suddenly became possible. And with the versatility of Prismatic, Hunter gained access to Blink and Grapple on a solid damage subclass with access to on-demand Radiant and Weaken. And of course, Hunters have always had the advantage in activities where there's no rally available at the start since their skating tech doesn't require a super. With the nerfing of Banner of War, another class had to take up the mantle of overpowered melees. Surprisingly, it wasn't Titan for once. Instead, we got Hunter with Syntheseps Relativism and Stylish Executioner on Prismatic, chunking bosses like Wrathful for a third of their health per grapple. Solo dungeon runners were excited to try running with 1 phases, but knowing Bungie, this tech was temporarily banned in case they ended up patching it, which they did in October. But enough about the final shape launch. What happened in the aftermath? Well, 2 days later we found out that desync was patched in King's Fall, and then a day after that, Destiny's latest raid was launched, and it was off to the races to find strategies and skips for it. The Speedrun.com team was also hosting a community-wide Salvation's Edge tournament in collaboration with Evan F and CB Gray, so plenty of teams were looking to optimize the raid in order to stand a chance at winning the competition. While this was going on, a couple new things were found after the launch of episode Echoes. Game-breaking tech in a PDR glitch was made public on the 12th, which was used to solo the Herald of Finality for the first time, but was then quickly patched out before it was tried for any speedrunning strategies. 3 days later, people discovered that you can cast Ascension after grappling to gain great bursts of horizontal speed. This was later brought into the strategy used in the Verity encounter in Salvation's Edge speedruns. Pretty cool stuff. In the midst of these finds, runner Rua submitted the first ever sub-10 solo Spire of the Watcher run, utilizing a rare edge transit roll with the ability to perk swap between Envious Assassin and Cascade Point, allowing him to cleanly 1-phase Achilles and 2-phase Perseus with ease. While this run would later go on to garner a little controversy due to its use of a now unusable perk swap tech, it's still a pretty great run and an achievement worth highlighting in a video like this. On the 21st of June, a video was posted to Chinese streaming platform Bilibili that would start a spree of raid teams running Garden of Salvation over the next few months. In it, a player sprays lost signal shots at a closed tether box, and instead of doing nothing like you'd expect, the cube inside turns on and connects to them through the closed box. This discovery was single-handedly responsible for completely changing first encounter, as well as parts of second, encounters that have been run largely the same way for years. For the next few months, there would be the highest number of teams running any raid this year in the Black Garden, competing for the best time with the entire raid transformed by new strategies. During this first month of the new DLC, everyone was farming for exotic class items, so interest in the dual Destiny exotic mission was at an all-time high. Naturally, given community interest and the mission's speedrun compatible cooperative design, a couple duos ended up trying to achieve faster and faster clear times. On the 23rd of June, Special Hero and Sutek teamed up to achieve an impressive 11-11 together. The last 2 events in June both occurred on the 25th, one being the first recorded instance of the Storm's Edge super being used for a breach, and the other being the removal of surges in raids and dungeons. The former would lead to a variety of skips being developed, including a real early mission complete option in Garden, a potential Golgoroth skip in King's Fall, and an early version of the skip to Herald during first encounter in Salvation's Edge. As for the latter, this let everyone breathe a sigh of relief, since you wouldn't have to wait for the right surges to run optimized categories without losing 25% of your damage. To kick off July, we have 2 mission runs. On the 2nd, runner Soggy Toast submitted the first ever sub-4 solo Sabotaging Salvation, another one of the few remaining levels that favor Warlock's access to neutral movement through Glide and Icarus Dash over Hunter's immediate access to long-distance skating. 4 days later, Reshi would submit the first ever sub-3 solo Investigation run, one of the most popular short and sweet Hunter missions amongst level runners. While teams were prepping for the Salvation's Edge tournament on the 28th, both solo witness hopefuls and 6-man speedrunners tanked an unfortunate but deserved Still Hunt nerf on the 23rd, dropping its damage twofold with both a direct nerf and through preventing its Golden Gun shot from benefiting from Sniper's Meditation. Before we talk about the big tournament day, there's one more mission run that I want to talk about, and it's actually the only duo run I'm mentioning this year. On the 24th of July, Speeding Rex and ScottyOp submitted a 6:43 duo Desperate Measures run, the final mission of the Lightfall campaign. What's special about this run is that it's the first mission run I've seen making good use of the interdimensional res breach, which is uncommon even for more complex categories like raids and dungeons. This run is not only pretty clean, but the skip is one of the coolest I've ever seen in a mission run. Finally, the day arrives. July 28th, Evan F and CB Gray all dressed up for the occasion, casting 3 hours of running Salvation's Edge, with the fastest time achieved over this period being crowned the winner. In the end, it came down to 2 teams getting times within 3 seconds of each other, with Team Hedgehog taking the win over Team Summum Bonum with a time of 18:24. Certainly not a bad showing for the first 2 months of the raid being out, and no doubt entertaining for the thousands of viewers watching their first Salvation's Edge speedrun.
It's gonna be so close!
Oh.
Nick, I think they got it! They got it! World record!
While this wasn't the end of the Salvation's Edge arc in 2024, in August things were relatively quiet on the raid front. Unfortunately, it wasn't a great month for the rest of speedrunning either. On the 6th, we got hit with a double whammy. Mountaintop got a speed limit imposed on its momentum, meaning no more sticky stacking, and perhaps even more annoyingly, Bungie fixed the Cascade Envious Edge Transit situation by making it so that any loadout swap would result in any overflowed mags being reset. This was a huge nerf to Envious Assassin in general, a perk that had been rather popular in both challenges and speedruns alike, along with other perks like Reconstruction and Overflow. Bad news aside, there were a couple runs worth talking about in August. Runner Worm ran laps around the previous Desperate Measures solo record on the 12th, beating it by nearly 3 minutes with a 9:38 submission. While many Lightfall runners dread this mission because of its famously long ad clear section, this run manages to make this mission more interesting through some pretty well thought out strategies, including the use of the Manticore exotic SMG, something I never thought I'd see in a speedrun. The very next day, the ability to transfer Eager Edge to certain relics to give them increased lunge range was patched, but runners were quick to find a new way to regain this functionality. By using some sort of animation between the readying of an Eager Edge sword like blinking or dodging, and the readying of another sword like Relic, it was discovered that you could still transfer the perk. With this method, you could temporarily have Eager Edge on relics like those found in King's Fall entrance, or one of the more popular options as of late, Ergo Sum. While the feedback towards the Pale Heart Lost sectors has been largely negative, especially with how much more of a grind there is now to reach max delta for sectors in general, 2 of the 3 Final Shape sectors are actually pretty fast. I'd like to highlight 2 runs in particular. On the 29th of August, Xylent achieved the first and only sub-minute expert Blooming Deep run on the site, making use of the only actual skip I've ever seen in a sector run. By mountaintop boosting over the roof from spawn straight to the boss room, the sector is shortened to about a quarter of its length, making it a much quicker experience. 2 days later, Levy achieved a 127 expert Forgotten Deep run, bringing the same ferocity that I've come to expect from an experienced strafe glider to the Pale Heart. Great movement all throughout. Coming into September, the last sector run I have on my list is going to be a 121 Vel's Labyrinth expert run submitted by Levy on the 7th. The only hunter run I'm featuring from this entire year, it actually makes use of the Threadrunner subclass in order to spam Widow Silk grapples through the tight tunnels of the recently reworked sector. Next up, we have one of my favorite dungeon speedruns in Fireteam Grasp of Avarice. This year, the first ever sub 5 was achieved by Keo and his team on the 12th with a 447 Fireteam submission. If you thought last year's Grasp run was impressive, this one is even more optimized with an even faster skip and even faster kills. Clean work from these 3. The Witch Queen was praised by the Destiny community at large for its great campaign, and speedrunners are no exception. A lot of mission runners have still stayed loyal to running their favorites from year 5, even as we are now 2/3 through year 7. One of these missions is the Ritual, the concluding mission of the campaign, which is the longest of the bunch, but arguably makes up for it with its unique mechanics and great use of space. Mission runners are often the best at making full use of what they have available to them, and this run is a great example. Our here uses Wishender to kill the Threadweaver wizards with specific lineups during the final fight. With an end time of 8:05, I was pretty impressed by plenty of aspects of this run, from movement to boss damage. The last time a Destiny 2 raid speedrun appeared on GDQ was 2021, so I was plenty excited when Asuka424, an organizer for GDQ Hotfix, reached out to Team Hedgehog to get us in for an Express Lane speedrun showcase at the end of September. While it's funny to watch multiple consecutive third encounter softlocks, I can speak for my team when I say that we were happy to be a part of bringing one of Destiny 2's most complex raid speedruns to a more mainstream speedrunning audience. Thanks again to Asuka, Dado, and Zemo, and I hope more Destiny 2 runners will be featured in similar events in the future, as I know the game is entertaining as hell to watch even if you don't play the game. I'm sure some of you remember this next run from the speedrun breakdown on this channel not so long ago, but for those that don't, the final speedrun of September is going to be Garden of Salvation, completed by Sick and his team in under 7 minutes. The shortest time of any full raid since the Scourge days, this 658 Goss run is the perfect storm of strategy development in Destiny raid speedrunning. From lost signal boxes allowing for earlier and faster room access on first encounter, to new early mid subsides and ad clear setups during second encounter, to a way to push Consecrated off the map so that Sanctified mechanics can be done with 5 people. This raid's got it all. While it's still technically beatable with some newly theorized strats, I'm sure you guys know what happened to this raid recently, but we'll get there soon. October rolls around, and with it a new Salvation's Edge record is set by Kaz Magic and his team on the 4th, lowering the time to 16:01. A lot of teams are itching to lower this raid to a 13, but since it's probably the most punishing and complex raid run in the game, it'll probably be a while before you see any teams post a decent full run in 2025. 2 days later, an impressive Devil's Lair GM speedrun is uploaded by Special Hero and his team, the first GM run that I've decided to include this year. I'm sure everyone knows that the past season and a half have been absolutely dominated by Prismatic Titan, and Special Hero's squad has certainly been spearheading this recent movement with their mastery of Consecration's potential. I reached out to him and we both agreed that 2 runs in particular were the best showcases of GM speedrun mastery this year. This run is the first, and it's nice because it offers a direct comparison to the previous GM meta of using Cenotaph Mask with rocket spam. Not only did these guys beat the rocket record by over a minute, but this run is a mere 40 seconds or so off from the Fire Team normal difficulty record, which is insane compared to most other strikes. Sure, Consecration is insanely busted right now, but I think I can safely say that runs like these showcase just how much great players can do with powerful tools in Destiny. On the 8th, players said goodbye to Echoes and welcomed the next episode of the Final Shape DLC. Activity-wise, the Inverted Spire was finally reworked after a long wait, the second strike to be updated after Exodus crashed during Echoes. As for the artifact, while the new tonic system would end up enabling some pretty crazy runs in the coming months, this update wasn't all roses for other aspects of speedrunning. First, the elephant in the room. Since the release of this episode, guitar error codes have been consistently booting entire fire teams out of activities. Farming Overthrow, back to Orbit. Trying to kill Atrax, Orbit. Apparently, even other raids are beginning to experience this error code frequently as well, as it spreads from one activity to the next. There have been at least 3 Deepstone Crypt speedrun teams that have been put on temporary hiatus, as the raid is legitimately unplayable at the moment. Hopefully this is addressed in the near future. 3 more patches dropped with Revenant, orb spamming through Siphon helmet swapping, the relic baiting strat used in Pantheon, and stylish boosted grapples were nerfed heavily with biotic enhancements. None of these were particularly impactful, but the 3rd patch did come with an unintended consequence. A day after Revenant dropped, runners quickly found out that 1-2 Punch was for some reason not giving a 1.25 times boss damage multiplier that it used to give on certain melees like uncharged and grapple melees. This meant that grapple melees now only receive double damage using 1-2 Punch instead of the 2.5 times multiplier they used to receive. Of course, Banner of War had already been gutted at Final Shape release, but an additional 25% damage being gone kicked every grapple melee damage strategy on the way out. The last big thing in October for Destiny speedrunning was the release of Vesper's Host on October 11th, featuring 2 of the most unique bosses in dungeon history as well as a way to skip the entire first encounter. This dungeon was ripe for speedrunning. While a couple teams had a go at the dungeon, the current record sits at 832, submitted by Asunix's team on the 26th. If you haven't seen a speedrun of this dungeon yet, I highly recommend giving this one a watch. Unfortunately, November served as a bit of a buzzkill for Vesper runners, as the oob people were using to get to first encounter quickly was patched using a death barrier on the 5th. For solo runners, this meant no more Titan, since you now need Blink to bypass the barrier, which made the Ranix 1 phase much more annoying, and for Fireteam runners, this slowed down entrance quite a bit as well. As I mentioned earlier, the other GM run I wanted to highlight was the first sub-5 Heist Battleground Moon run posted by Special Hero on November 17th. While this team tried in previous seasons to get this done on Strat and Titans, they finally pulled through during Revenant and accomplished a blazing fast 457. The consistency and rigor that this team runs with reminds me of Year 5 Simple, Two-Face, and Toby, and I'm glad that there's another team that has taken the torch of GM speedrunning as far as this group has. The very same day, StoneCool20 uploaded a 611 solo run of the brand new Final Shape Strike Liminality. While this strike might not be as exciting as some of D2's classics, I still wanted to include a valiant effort at making this collection of winding tunnels as fast as possible. While damage strategies for Vesper's host speedruns had migrated away from Grand Overture by November, this next patch cemented Grand Overture under a foot of concrete. One of the big benefits of using Grand Overture for burst damage was its ability to stack its volley using immune targets. This made it a potential option in encounters with a limited supply of adds, especially with an artifact favoring arc weapons. On the 19th, not only was the ability to stack off panels in the Corrupted Puppeteer encounter removed, but hitting any sort of immune target wouldn't yield any volley stacks. Not a huge loss overall since most burst encounters favor abilities or parasite, but still a rather limiting change to one part of the speedrun DPS toolkit. Our final raid run of the year features Vow of the Disciple, one of my favorites. Now you might be confused why this is the last raid run I'm going to talk about in 2024, given that we've only talked about 6 so far. While 2024 is a little special, thanks to error codes in VOG and DSC, as well as the wall patch in Irute and Crota, this marks the first calendar year in Destiny 2 history where a raid hasn't had its record broken from January to December. Hopefully next year we'll get to see some new times for these 3 raids, but for now let's get back to Vow. This run showcases some new strategies compared to the last time we featured Vow in a speedrun breakdown, including new cart respawn strats and a no-wipe roll start. This team put in a lot of work to get this run done, and even had to run after the 1-2 punch stealth nerfs, which made the 1-floor caretaker strat considerably less consistent. Thankfully, Toast and his team were able to secure a sub 17 before they stopped running, which was their target achieved. Good stuff. There's no specific run I want to point to for this next bit, but I thought it was a fun little event I saw occurring in the community. For whatever reason, toward the end of November going into December, a bunch of runners decided to get together and start running Nightmare Hunts, a relatively dead category from Shadowkeep. Over this week-long period, almost every Nightmare Hunt got some love from various runners. Definitely not on my 2024 speedrun bingo card, but I'm always excited to see less popular categories see some runs. To wrap up November, we have what is undoubtedly the most impressive strike speedrun of the year. On November 30th, Trashcan submitted a 519 solo Scarlet Keep that turned a lot of mission runners' heads. Every single second of this run is routed immaculately, and the mechanics are on point as well. If you've never watched a strike speedrun before, I strongly recommend giving this one a look, as I think strike runs often fly under the radar, and this one's obviously had a lot of effort put into it. Down to the last month of the year. Let's kick things off with a tragic banger, and by that, I'm talking about a run that would have been the first sub 11 trio garden on speedrun.com, but unfortunately one of the runners forgot to record their POV. While I can show you part of the run from another runner's POV, Spyro and his team were unfortunately not able to get another run after achieving this 10:47 on December 4th, which is technically the record. And that is, of course, since on December 10th, Bungie added walls surrounding the Consecrated Mines spawn platform under the map. All the garden teams that were still running up until this point all suddenly came to a grinding halt. While the 6-man record is still probably beatable, a lot of teams lost the motivation to run thanks to this change. As for the trio record, no Harpy push would be a much bigger obstacle to overcome due to damage constraints being much rougher with 3 people instead of 6. That said, I still want to highlight this achievement since the 10:47 would have been a pretty solid run in better circumstances. To end off our year, I actually have 4 back-to-back dungeon bangers. Since a lot of the raids in the game aren't really runnable right now and the artifact we have makes Bittersweet incredibly strong, a lot of people are running dungeons on the side in this admittedly pretty solid meta. While a lot of these runs haven't been submitted yet as these teams continue to run into 2025 for their goal times, I still wanted to show off the work that has been put into these 4 dungeons since we last talked about them in 2023. First up, Spire of the Watcher. Though its repetitive mechanics aren't necessarily the most popular within the general Destiny 2 population, this dungeon offers fast players a chance to show off how tight and precise their mechanics are. And watching Tall Sandy and his team in this 409, that couldn't be more obvious. I mean, just watch how fast every ascent floor is. I mean, Achilles barely gets to move before every fuel rod is activated and he has to start heading to damage. Crazy stuff from these guys. Pit of Heresy is second on this dungeon train, and the team in question, well, let's just say they love this dungeon. Between them, they have almost 8,000 combined full pit clears, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. But enough about that. Let's talk about their 434, a run which really demonstrates just how much experience these 3 runners have in this activity. From clean relic skating to fast wizard routing, this run averages a minute per encounter, which is some crazy pacing even for a dungeon speedrun. This year, a couple teams revisited Ghosts of the Deep after the original sub 10 time was set in 2023 during Season of the Deep. This dungeon is famous for its slog of a transition leading to Ekthar, as well as the lengthy full round opening encounter. However, with studied map knowledge and clever use of Ariana's Vow, Tall Sandy's team manages to start Ekthar in just over 5 minutes, and the duo Bittersweet Bake is just as fast as you'd expect. On Samuma, the team opts to use Eager Swords to speed up mechanics, knowing that they can use Cloud Strike with this season's busted artifact mods in order to secure the kill after spending 8 minutes and 12 seconds in the dungeon. The last dungeon we have to talk about is Warlord's Ruin. One of the most straightforward dungeons in the game. In speedrunning, the only stuff that matters is how fast Wrathful puts up his totem, a little jail RNG, and your kills. And of course, with the artifact we have this season, all 3 bosses are absolutely obliterated by heavy GLs, with a special shoutout to the Locust Ogre falling to Bittersweet in just 1 plate's worth of damage. And finally, we arrive at the present. Today is December 27th, and just a few hours ago, I verified the last speedrun of the year that's going to be included in this video, Seiyun's Last Chance solo run in 352. This run features plenty of cool movement tech that you won't find almost anywhere else, from water skating to relic ground lines. An impressive finish to an eventful year in the Destiny speedrunning community, one filled to the brim with new weapons, new tech, new routing, and new strats. This video is a lot longer than last year's, but I thought that the 2023 Rewind excluded a lot of runs that deserve praise, and didn't really contextualize the runs it did include enough to evoke the community sentiment or memories from around the time. Most of the people I polled in the Speedrun panel server voted for this chronological format, so I hope you enjoyed the video more one way or another. Thanks to all the runners who came together this year to create, test, practice, share, and grind as much as you all did. If you're curious about any of these runs, the spreadsheet that I used to write this script and track every event is in the description, with links to every single run sorted by date. I know Destiny's not in the best state right now, but the speedrunning community has been through arguably worse, and the sandbox is still in a pretty decent state, so I'm excited to see what 2025 holds for us all. See you next year.